Hello, everybody. My name is Manisha. I'm here today to talk about why we choose to suffer. Understanding this truth that we create our own reality, let's try to understand why is it that we tend to create suffering and choose to stay in that suffering. And the reason I want to share this message is because I've done it myself. And it took me a while to realize why I am doing this, what am I achieving out of it, and how to get out of it myself. So let's try to understand what is this suffering. Now, for each of us, our definition of suffering is very different and unique because we are living very different lives and our realities are created accordingly. So if I am to ask you, what is your kind of suffering? Some of you may come up with an answer of being stuck in a job that you don't like. That's one kind of suffering. The second kind of suffering is this feeling of being alone all the time. Another kind of suffering could be that I have everything I want, I have all the money I want, and I'm a really rich person. I've worked my way up, and on many levels I would be considered successful, but for some reason I can't maintain or even have loving relationships in my life. So that's another kind of a suffering. Now, think about what is your suffering. What do you think you suffer from? Right? Now, understanding that and understanding all the different kinds of suffering, we can also start to realize that the reason we choose our suffering is firstly because this suffering that we're even talking about is probably something that we have been experiencing for years or for months to a point where it just feels normal to have that suffering. Like, for example, the kind of suffering I had that was very real and very apparent to me was I was having migraines for 15 years. And it reached a point where I didn't even think there was something wrong in having a migraine. I didn't even think it was not normal to have a migraine 3 times a week. So when we continue to stay in our suffering, to justify it, we actually tell ourselves, yeah, this is normal, and we settle for less when we are suffering, right? And the reason we can't seem to move past it is because on so many levels that suffering becomes a part of our comfort zone. It is our normal, our everyday, something we can expect, something that has become such a part of your life that it is assumed it is going to be there and never leave our lives, right? So what happens when we identify with this suffering is that we firstly think we can't get out of it because we've identified with it. It's become a part of who we are, and it's become a part of our story. Now, if I am to tell you we are not our story, our life experiences has just been a way of bringing us to where we are. Nothing more than that. You're not your story. But so many of us identify with a story. So when we suffer from challenges at work, because growing up, we've always had to prove ourselves. So at our work environment, we're constantly trying to prove ourselves. And this is a kind of suffering we're not very well aware of. We only are more aware of the symptoms that we experience having to prove ourselves every day on many levels, proving our existence to ourselves, that we're even worthy of having this existence and earning that money that we do. So it becomes such a normal part of your life experience to have that suffering that it is sometimes hard to let go because it's become a part of your everyday existence. So what happens then? The real fear is what happens when we let go of that suffering. And if we let go of that suffering, that means we're going beyond our comfort zone. That means once we move past this suffering, there is probably another kind of suffering that is not known to us, that we are unaware of. At least this kind of suffering I am so aware of. I've found a way to deal with it, and I'd rather stay in this suffering than move into another kind. So sometimes we're afraid that by stepping out of our comfort zone, we're going to experience something so new, we won't know how to deal with that. So we'd rather stay in our comfort zone and continue to experience this suffering. It's just a thought, so just think about it. When I had my migraines, it served me. I was able to draw boundaries. I could take some time off work. I could tell people, not today, I just want to be by myself. Except I chose pain and suffering as a way to do that, because I didn't know how else to say no politely. And coming from a place of love, I couldn't do that then. So it came from this pain and suffering. So yeah, sometimes we are afraid of just letting go of that suffering, because in that suffering and in that healing from that suffering, our story changes. Everything on some level we have identified with changes. Then on a very deep level, we're almost afraid of who do we become when we are free of this suffering. And especially if your suffering has been something you've been experiencing lifelong, there's this fear on a deep level, you're going to be somebody you've never known. But what if I tell you, when you let go of a suffering, that doesn't have to be a new kind of suffering. There's more openness, there's more allowing, there's more receiving. There's more love for self, because in that act of releasing things that no longer serve you, whether it is pain, suffering, situations, people, places that don't support your growth, you live a better life. Another thing, and another reason why we sometimes hold on to our suffering, is because through that suffering, we've actually achieved a lot of things. So in my case, I achieved support and love from not just my partner, but from my colleagues. They understood me when I was having a migraine. They gave me my space. All of that was there. So how is your suffering serving you? And I know sometimes it's so hard to grasp that concept that we could even create suffering in the first place that would serve us. But it's just that that's what we had chosen then, and we're free. So releasing judgment, releasing this thought, or how could I even do that to myself? Ask yourself, how is this helping me? How does being stuck in a situation help me? What am I gaining positively from it? And a lot of the times, you're just experiencing love and support from people maybe you never thought you could receive that from. Or you realize in this act of suffering, you actually have time for yourself, and it kind of forces you to give time for yourself. And it's sometimes through that suffering that we get to be with ourselves more. We get to understand who we are more. And if you think about it, every suffering that we experience, whether it is one kind or multiple kind, it shows us more and more of who we are. That we can rise above it, that we're strong, that we're resilient, that nothing can break us down, that I can handle this. But if you can learn all those positive things without having to experience pain and suffering, wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that just be easier and smoother? Sometimes we actually have an issue with things being easy because we don't believe that lessons that come through love and lessons that come through peace and lessons that come from loving yourself would stay as permanently as the lessons you learn from fear-based programs or suffering-based or pain-based programs. So below are a few theta downloads that will help you alleviate some of those patterns that we think. Of course, it's very important to be aware of where these thoughts are coming from. Why do I choose my suffering? Just give yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes to introspect and see, oh, so that's how it's helping me. But do I want that pain and suffering? No. I would rather start to experience life more positively and be motivated through love rather than fear. And you'll start to see the shift every time you choose love, whether it's love for self, love for others, love for both, so you can have a win-win situation. You'll start to realize how light you feel, how pain-free you feel. So below are some downloads, and I really hope this helps those who have received my message today. From my heart to yours.